Ready to get started now?
Yeah, whenever you're ready.
We're back, everyone. We took a break and I'm happy to bring you more helpful information. I'm Gloria Matthews, Director of Community Outreach for The View, one of the hosts for Viewcast, the visual podcast that's for individuals who are deaf and hard of hearing. And their tribe. My guest today is Liam Doyle, who has almost 13,000 views for his TEDx talk on his path to disability advocacy. Liam is an ADA coordinator at Tampa General Hospital in Tampa, Florida. We also, Liam, I'm gonna let you talk for a little bit.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, Gloria. It's a pleasure to be here today. I really appreciate it. And like you said, I'm the ADA coordinator for Tampa General Hospital here in Florida. I've been doing that for about 8 weeks. I'm relatively new. It's been a great experience so far, and really looking forward to getting to talk to you today about, some different issues that are facing the disabled community.
Awesome. Well, first, I would like to ask you, what is a disability advocate?
That's a really interesting question, and I think there are two parts to that. When you look at disability advocacy, for me, there are people who have disabilities who advocate for other people, and that can be anything from doing direct policy work to just talking about what it's like to live with a disability within their communities and with other people. There's also those people who don't have a disability that are there to listen or want to do more to make their areas more inclusive, or just want to start a conversation about sort of the day-to-day challenges that we can go through. And I think both are equally important. When you start with disability advocacy, a lot of times it is people with disabilities naturally, but we need that support from the able-bodied community, because without outside exposure and outside learning, we'll be standing by ourselves.
Right. I agree with that.
Yep.
I really do. It's the same with people who have hearing loss. We can only do so much for our own community, but we really need those to actually listen to us on the outside to actually support us as well.
Right.
So I believe that goes across the board. So my next question would be, what educational courses or internet sites should someone look at if they want to be a disability advocate?
Sure. So there are a couple that I can recommend to you that are sort of the gold standard of what we use in the ADA coordinator realm. The first being the US Access Board. It has a lot of really good information about not just the regulations of the ADA, but actual practical implementation of some of the features and making sure that everything is accessible. Like I today used it to look up the height requirements for a washer dryer. And so it gives you a bunch of information about literally anything and everything you can think of as it pertains to the ADA. Obviously, that leads me to the ada.gov, which is their national website. And also, what I would recommend that people that want to get into more advocacy is to look into the particular regions for the ADA. So the way that it's set up nationally, there's about 5 or so states that are a particular region. So no matter where you are in the country, you can go on the website and find, okay, so for instance, living in Florida, I'm in the Southeast region, and then that will connect me with local advocates to my area, and they have really great information as it pertains to what's going on in this region of the country versus the Midwest or the Northeast or anything like that. So it just depends on that kind of thing. But I would really recommend, like I said, finding your specific area and then reaching out to those resources.
That's awesome. Great information to know. So in what way do you recommend individuals with disabilities to start achieve independence in their daily life?
Sure. I think the most important thing for anyone with a disability who wants to be more independent is to first figure out what that looks like for them and what that means to them. So your version of independence and my version of independence are completely different because we have not only different disabilities, but also different outlooks. So the first thing that anyone needs to do is to say, what does that independence mean for me? And what do I have to do to get that? And that's oftentimes the hardest conversation that you can have with yourself, is to figure out what you want out of life and then start taking the steps to go get that and, be where you want to be.
Yeah, yeah. So I guess I have a follow-up question to that.
Sure.
So for those who need to figure out what independence will look like for them, what resources would you point out to them to get a general idea of how to go through that process?
Sure. So let's say, for example, you're looking at transportation. A lot of times with a fixed route bus system, they have companion operations that help, that specifically are tailored for people with disabilities, that will go and pick you up at your specific location and bring you directly to where you want to go. You do have to schedule that, but they are companion pieces to a fixed route bus system, and it's regulated by the National Transit. It's the I'm sorry, the National Transit Department. So it's a federal regulation that says we have to have it, and that really helps with different independence. And again, just finding what you're looking for. So if it's transportation, do some research in your area, figure out what options you have, and reach out to your city's ADA coordinator. I'm from Louisiana originally. I've been here for about 8 weeks, and before I accepted this position in Tampa, one of the first things I did was reach out to the local ADA coordinator and said, what's the accessibility like? What are some of the pitfalls that you have been exposed to, and how's your transportation? So, there are people out there that are going to be able to help you with anything and everything you have. It's just being cognizant enough to make those connections and reach out and ask.
I agree. I think those resources would be very helpful.
Yeah.
Yes. So what has been your experience in asking people to accommodate you in the things you may need to do at work?
Sure. So before I got into medicine, I worked in local government for about 7 years, and that came with a lot of policy change, a lot of awareness activities, a lot of planning in terms of making sure that our programming was accessible to everyone that was wanting to visit our city or live there. And in my experience, people want to help. They want to make things more accessible. They want to make things as inclusive as possible. They maybe don't necessarily know how. And that's where sort of the self-advocacy side of things comes in, because when you're advocating for other people, you have to make sure first that you're okay. And you have to make sure that you have your needs met before you can help other people, because if you're not on solid grounds, you're not going to be as effective. So one of the things that you definitely want to do is make sure that you have all your needs met. And that again goes to understanding what your needs are and what your rights are. But I think, like I said, that people want to they want to help, and they want to make things as smooth as possible. They just maybe need a little bit of guidance in terms of what that looks like for the individual.
Right, right. And you're right. You have to do it for yourself before you can help someone else out.
Yeah.
I agree with that. So what has it been like in a social setting, like restaurants, libraries, and public outings?
Yeah, so I mean, that's completely, it can be a total crapshoot. It depends on a myriad of different factors, including, weather, my mood in general, depending on how, because you have to be accommodating no matter where you go, and no matter what you do. There has to be a little bit of leeway that you're able to give. The question is, how much leeway do you give, right? And so that's why I said that there's outside factors that just depend on any given day, how I'm feeling and how much rope I'm going to give them, that kind of thing. I think that being out in public and doing things in a social nature, that's very important, because not only is it good for the person, but it's also good for the community as a whole. Because if we can normalize that and say, this is a regular thing, and it sounds like it's 2022, you would think that we wouldn't have to have this conversation, but we still do. The more people who are willing and able to step outside their door, the better, because that's going to help all these other, like you said, restaurants, movie theaters, stuff like that. Like, if we expose them to different people, they have to then learn how to accommodate, and it's going to be easier down the line.
Right, right, right. And the more exposure the community is exposed to the disability population, the more they would actually start to take notice
Yeah,
of all
absolutely.
the difficulties that makes it an obstacle course for most people that live with a disability. And they can enjoy it, but the person with the disability really can't, because they need something to accommodate that.
Right.
So that is really good to know, because a lot of community members believe that this isn't necessary or that isn't necessary because it's one person.
Right.
But that's all they see, is just the one person. But it's not about one person. It's about more people in the disability community actually need it.
Yeah, sure. So I've had conversations, and going back to restaurants, my hometown has hundreds of restaurants, and we've put in some ramps that weren't there before. This was a few years ago. I worked with a couple restaurants and made them accessible. And some of the questions I got from people that didn't understand were, why don't you just go somewhere else? Why don't you just go to a different pizza place or get a sandwich somewhere else? And it's not about me, it's about the person who comes behind me. So I was doing it not necessarily for myself, but for the next person who needs it and didn't know that they needed it, or didn't, it would be great to say everything's perfect and we don't have to work at it, but that's not realistic mentality. So the best we can do is work with what we have and improve wherever we can.
Yes, yes. And another thing I would add in there is that it's not, the ramp isn't just only used for wheelchair users.
Exactly.
Used for people who have a sprained ankle, or senior citizens that walk with a cane or a walker. I mean, these are things that are used daily for those who have temporary disabilities, or for those who are struggling to walk as well. So that's something I believe everyone should keep in mind. It's there for everyone, including wheelchairs.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so for individuals who are employed, so how can they advocate for themselves while
Sure.
at work?
So the first thing, again, I would recommend is realizing that in terms of employment, you have rights. And if you're asking for accommodation, that is perfectly okay. I think a lot of times people with disabilities, and I know myself even years ago, before I really got comfortable in this sort of role that I started in 2014, I would be scared to ask for accommodation because I don't want that to reflect poorly on me as an employee, right? Because you want to be a team player. So I would go above and beyond to overcompensate, when really I should have been the one who was helped by just changing my roles a little bit for for earlier jobs that I had, right? So recognizing that just because you have a different set of skills or a different role than someone else, that doesn't make you a lesser employee, and realizing that you're allowed to ask for these accommodations because they're very critical. And again, you know, it's so important to know those rights and responsibilities on our part, because the employers, oftentimes, if you don't ask, they don't know. Right. And so it's an education for both yourself and for the employers in general. If you say, okay, I need this, this, and this, and here's why, that will hopefully get them to thinking. And, not every company is Amazon, where they have, thousands of employees and they're so used to just cranking these out. Smaller companies too, it's more about the exposure that they have and the experiences they have. So, no matter what it is, if you need help, ask for it. And I think 98% of the time, people are going to want to give it.
Yeah, that is true. I know firsthand, especially when it comes to job interviews, people feel like they have all the experience to qualify for the job.
Yeah.
But because of their disability, they don't get hired. And we all know that's a discrimination right there, but it's hard to prove.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
yeah, so that's just a common theme that the disability community is faced with.
Sure. And also, I went through the gambit in terms of finding a job. So I left my role with the city of Lafayette in 2020, and I applied for maybe 30 jobs, and got 5 interviews. And the thing is, it wasn't so much that it was my disability that was holding me back, but it was also the timing. The pandemic was right in the throw of things, and this was early 2020. So the timing was terrible. The job market was terrible. Things have bounced back a little bit now, but there are other outside factors that come into play before it's automatically, oh, it's my disability. And so I don't want people to think that you don't get a job, it's because of your disability, so that means you should stop trying. Finding the right job, it's possible, and you're gonna find somewhere where you're happy and valued.
Right.
Like anything else with living with a disability, it's going to take more time and more effort. The
Right.
question just becomes, how much time and effort do you want to put in?
That's very true. That is very true. And it's important that everyone understand that disabled people don't want to be home all the time
Right.
and living on Social Security. I
Right.
mean, they want to be productive members of society too.
Yeah, of course, we all do. That was a big thing for me. Like when I transitioned to this new role, I was recently able to say, okay, I'm employed, so I can finally get rid of Social Security. I literally did that 2 or 3 weeks ago. That's such a huge monumental step for me, and it's been something that I've wanted since I was 17. And I've been gainfully employed since I was probably 19, right? So I've been working this whole time. I was in school, I finished my bachelor's, I did, everything that I thought was the right thing to do. And it just took that time and patience and persistence to say, okay, I want more for myself. And now I have this amazing job in Tampa and am able to help people and communicate with people like you, which is fantastic. And also, as a result, can check off some of those bucket lists from when I was 17.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So, what advice or tip would you give for people looking for a job?
I think the first thing that's really important is realize what you may need accommodations with before you even go in. Like, really pay attention to what the job is. So for example, I know for a fact that I could never work in the food industry, just with kitchens and the way they're set up. that's a whole industry that just, for me personally, isn't open. That doesn't mean that people with disabilities can't do that, but it doesn't work for me, and that's fine. So you have to be selective in the types of jobs you go out for. And when it comes to the actual interview process, you talked about asking for accommodation and your employers not being able, not hiring you because you're disabled. When it comes to the actual interview process, under the ADA, you don't necessarily have to disclose that you have a disability until you get hired. So if you went through, like for me personally, I'm very comfortable with the fact that I use a wheelchair. I disclose that right away just because that's my choice. But if I went through the entire process in applying for any job and they hired me and then I said, okay, I need this, and accommodation, that's perfectly fine. It's just a question of, so you don't necessarily, if you're not comfortable talking about the fact that you're going to need either accommodation or any kind of special, extra time for anything, that's fine. And so it's really just, again, finding out what's best for you and then figuring out how to do it. And when I started with working, it was part-time. It was on the weekends. And this was years ago, but I worked every weekend, not because I needed money, because I had the Social Security and I was fine, but just because I wanted to get out and socialize and do stuff, and provided a little extra money. So, why not? Start small and work your way out. If you have a bunch of experience, go for the bigger jobs. But if you're just starting out, then, start smaller. And this is the same thing with, employment, with advocacy, with everything. Start small, start in your own backyard, start where you're comfortable, and then build out from there. Have those conversations, create that network for yourself, and then say, okay, I'm comfortable here. Let's take it a little bit further and get further and further outside of your comfort zone as you go forward.
That's very good advice. Thank you.
Absolutely.
So what is your wish for the next big move in seeing positive changes for people with disabilities?
I think that we are in a time where certainly across the board, representation matters in all forms of media and any kind of, public policy, any kind of public movement. Representation matters. So I would like to see more people interacting with people with disabilities that don't have a disability and don't have that background and don't know what it's like, and just getting them to the table and saying, this is what we go through. And then even on our side, being as open to people without disabilities as we are with those who have disabilities, which obviously we're going to be comfortable. There's a shared kind of kinship with someone who has shared experiences. But it's equally important to create those bonds with people who don't know what it's like, because that's how you learn. And it goes both ways. So I think continuing to say, we want more for ourselves. We want to have the same quality of life as someone who doesn't have a disability, and continuing to figure out how best to fit into that sort of sphere and say, this is what we want, and going from there. But yeah, representation and stuff like this, public speaking and getting out there is really important, and just continuing to have these conversations, I think it goes a long way.
Right. I've seen in recent years that more and more people with disabilities are starting to speak up.
Yeah.
And it's a nice to see more represented in the public. And I just hope that those without disabilities, especially parents who have children with disabilities, would also become more involved, because it's not just about their child, it's about making it possible for all other families to have to deal with it. And so if it's affecting one family in the neighborhood, imagine how many in the same community may be dealing with that. So I think seeing all that will bring out more from those who don't have a disability.
Sure.
So is there anything else that you want to share to help people in the workplace?
I think that just in general, and I'll echo this again, you can do this. It's incredibly difficult and it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of patience and it takes a lot of rejection. So maybe develop some thick skin. But and that's again with everything with employment, with advocacy, you're going to be told no more times than you're going to be told yes. But it is absolutely worth keeping going if that's what you want. If you're happy where you are, then that's fine. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if you want more for yourself, then it's it's going to take time, it's going to take energy, it's going to take effort, but it will pay off.
Right.
Over time. And really that comes back to deciding what you want for yourself. And I think that there is, endless possibilities for anyone who wants to better themselves. So it's just finding the right fit for you.
Right. And I think it's important that we all know what our strengths and weaknesses are as well, and to actually be aware of those, because that also plays a factor in whether or not we can actually perform certain tasks on the job.
Sure. Absolutely.
So because my community is usually the deaf and hard of hearing, I usually would recommend that, they let the employer know what their needs are first, because they can't do an interview without.
Yeah, you want to make sure that you have, if you need an
Yeah.
interpreter, if you need, anything like that, and definitely, and that's, it's a comfort thing, and you got to realize that there may be some places that won't hire you because of that, but I think especially now with the diversity, equity, inclusion movement that we're seeing, a lot of places are looking for that kind of those kind of different people, and they embrace it. So it's just about trial and error initially, and then once you find something you like, go after it no matter what it is.
Right. And it's important to know that if you're patient with the process, you can get there.
Absolutely.
And it's just because of rejection, that doesn't mean you're not hireable. You just haven't found the job that will take you.
Sure.
So, it's a journey for sure, but it's one that we all have to go through. So, yeah. So, well, thank you so much, Liam. And we love the information that you shared.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. This was a real pleasure.
Yes. And thank you for joining us on our viewcast. We very much appreciate the time that you've taken to speak with me. So,
Yeah, very much. Like I said, it's an absolute pleasure.
oh, thank you. So be sure to check our website at viewspeak.com under viewcast for the list of today's information. And while you're there, send me an email or a comment if you got an idea to share with our viewers. Who knows, we may be asking you to come on the show. So be sure to hit the subscribe button to join the conversation. See you next time.